Hello and welcome. Thank you for taking the time to view this presentation that I'm going to give about the process known as dry point, a printmaking process that dates back to about the middle of the 15th century. And during this presentation, I'm going to be showing little bits at a time some of the equipment and of the process that's involved. To my right is the etching press that's going to deal with the printing, and then scattered all the way across to my left is going to be a whole series of the tools and again the processes that are used for this kind of a printmaking. Oh my gosh, there's a lot of steps. We'll go through them, and I hope you enjoy looking at it. Spread out on the table is the various materials and tools that are going to be used in this demonstration process, and as the video goes along, we're going to look at each one a little bit closer up, but I wanted you to see that with printmaking there is a certain amount of material and process required to do this. Great, now we're going to move into the actual printing and showing you the different elements of how a plate is made, and I look forward to showing you some things up in detail. The dry point process begins with selection of a suitable plate. That can range either from, lacquered wood, polished copper, or in the case of what I'm demonstrating today, it's going to be a sheet of just simple plastic. And to do the work, one simply has to use a sharp, usually steel, instrument, and that point is dug into the surface. Everywhere that a mark is made will hold ink. And I've got the plastic on a piece of black background so that these marks show up. Those marks can be anything from straightforward hatching, cross-hatching, scribbly marks. Any of these textures will hold ink. How hard you press, lightly or heavy, will make a difference in how much ink those marks will hold, and thus control the lights and darks of your final printed piece. This can take anywhere from a few minutes to several hours, however an artist wants to work. This example plate has been completed, and it's used mainly to make it what a lot of people call the dry point needle, again sharpened steel, but also I put in some tones by just using sandpaper, and they don't show up very well on the plate, but they do show up with the inking process that's about to start. And so what I'm going to be showing you now is the inking of the plate, the wiping of the plate, and then we'll move on in a bit to the actual printing. And so the ink that's going to be used is oil-based. It's a 16th century formula, still made today, but I don't want to get it on my hands. And so I use a material that generically is called barrier cream. This is Daniel Smith's version of it. It's essentially like hand lotion that you work into and under your fingernails and into your cuticles and into your skin, and it's water soluble. But the oil-based ink, when I get it on top of this barrier material, it won't stick to my skin. Ha! Very nice. Makes the cleanup easier. Okay, now, to apply the ink, just a dab is used, and the way a dry point plate works is that the ink must be scraped across the entire surface, whether it's a light area, a dark area, blank or full, ink goes across the whole surface. I like to work from the center towards the edges because then it minimizes how much ink gets in stray places like underneath or on the edges. So the whole plate is covered, and then the excess is scraped clean. The excess ink I'm leaving here in a pile in front of me because I can just reuse it for the second and subsequent prints. This is the part of the dry point process that kind of turns off some people because it can get messy and it is a little bit difficult. Remember that the process started with a completely smooth plate, and we put textures into it in the form of trees and cows and fences. I now need to remove that excess ink, and that's done with, there's a variety of wiping cloth, but my preference is a material called tarlatan it looks, and it's essentially cheesecloth with heavy sizing in it, so it's both stiff and absorbent. And as you can see me wiping around here, the image is starting to show up more clearly as I remove more ink. My first piece of tarlatan is saturated, so I've switched to a cleaner one that allows me to wipe some of the more delicate residual amounts of ink away. And this is, to me, is one of the exciting parts, and there are many, one of the exciting parts about doing dry point, where I can choose to stop wiping and print at any time. But I'm going to take it a little bit further with what's known as hand wiping, and that's why I have that barrier cream on. The hand, for me, is a more sensitive wiping instrument than is the cloth. As far as how much pressure am I using? Right now, just barely glancing onto the surface of the plate. And as a rule of thumb, the more clearly you can see the image, the less pressure you use to do the wiping. It is possible to wipe too much and thus create kind of a pale or ineffective image. How do you know when you're done? Most of that is just by experience. I know that I want to have a little bit of lighter tones where it's supposed to represent snow. And you can see this nasty dark cloth that I wiped my hand on. The hand can only take so much ink before it needs to have that excess wiped off. Otherwise, I cannot remove any excess ink from the plate itself. Things look good. Last step before the printing is to clean any stray or excess ink that might have accumulated on the edges. I don't like to have that. It tends to squish out and sometimes be a little offensive. And sometimes I'll make some slight alterations with a Q-tip, which is just a little bit more absorbent than my skin, and so it takes some of that ink tone off. And at this stage, this plate is ready to go to the press. Let me give you a quick introduction to what most people call an etching press. Technically, they're a cylinder press, and they get that name because the whole printing principle is based on cylinders. Down underneath is the cylinder that actually drives the press. Above it, as you see for this edge here, that's the press bed, a flat, heavy material. Above is the upper cylinder, and then the pressure is controlled by how much space is generated between the upper roller and this press bed, and that adjustment is done with these pressure screws right here, so I can tighten and loosen to quite an infinite number of possibilities. The inked plate is now ready for printing, and so I'm moving it onto the press bed, the horizontal surface in front of me. But on top of that, I have a registration jig, just simply a sheet of plexiglass with paper underneath that allows me to accurately and quickly place the plate, and now it's ready for the printing paper. But a little bit ago I was saying how I put on the barrier cream so that my hands will be able to be cleaned up later. Well, right now they're really messy, and I don't like to handle my expensive printing paper with nasty, messy hands. So I actually put on gloves to keep the ink off of these other surfaces. So my hands, they get cleaned up later, no worries. But I have to put the gloves on first to then handle the paper. This is a German cotton-based paper, and it's been dampened. When you do a dry point print, your paper pretty much has to be dampened, and what the dampening process does, soften the fibers, which allows them to absorb ink more smoothly and more effectively. And again, I have the template that allows me to line up the paper, place it in one shot, it's good to go. Cylinder presses, when you're printing a dry point, also require what are known as the felts. These are wool blankets of specific thicknesses and weaves that allow the press to evenly press the paper into the ink surface and also absorb the moisture, and then it'll be ready to print. The cylinder press has nice gear reduction, so even though there's a fair amount of pressure going on, I don't feel much effort required to crank this through. Unless there's some really peculiar reason, normally a dry point plate is passed through the press just once. That's sufficient to do the transfer of the ink. And from the back side, you can see one of the characteristics very clearly showing up, and that's this embossing. The thickness of the material embosses the paper, and that's called the plate mark. And that's something that, a lot of people who do dry point work, and they like that. Now, to peel the paper up, because it is damp and soft, I peeled it up kind of slowly so it doesn't tear, but it allows you to see the image coming up off of that inked plate surface. Success! Okay, with the successful printing of the first dry point, if a person wishes to print subsequent prints, a second, a third, a fourth, and so on, the entire inking and wiping procedure must be repeated as exactly as a person can do. And so the second print is generated, followed by the third. And a plastic plate, if it has a drawback, it's limitation in how many it can print. You're lucky if you can get 10 or 12 successful prints before it starts to wear out. But I usually only print 5 to 10, and so I like working on the plastic surface. That's the dry point process, and thank you very much for your time and attention for this presentation. My name is Jim Jereb. I'm working at the studio space in Laramie, Wyoming, and if you'd like to see this work or more of my other printmaking works, please just check out my website at jimjereb.com. And thank you very much.